In the shadows of a forgotten laboratory, where screams once echoed through sterile corridors, a young woman's silhouette became the most feared image in military history. They called her Subject 47, but the world would never know her real name. What started as a government experiment to create the perfect soldier ended with only one survivor, a woman whose very shadow could stop a trained killer's heart. This is not a story of science fiction. This is not a tale of superheroes or fantasy. This is the documented account of Dr. Sarah Chen, the only person to walk out of Project Nightfall alive, carrying secrets that 3 governments tried to bury forever. Her journey from a brilliant neuroscientist to the most wanted woman on Earth began with a single decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The enemy only saw a silhouette because that's all she allowed them to see. And sometimes, in the darkness between life and death, a shadow is all you need to survive. Dr. Sarah Chen adjusted her safety goggles for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. Her hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the classified documents spread across her desk in the underground facility known only as Site 7. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the pages marked with red stamps reading Top Secret, Project Nightfall. Sarah had been recruited 6 months ago from her position as head of neurology at Johns Hopkins. The offer had been too tempting to refuse. Unlimited funding, cutting-edge equipment, and the chance to work on breakthrough research that could revolutionize medicine. What they hadn't told her was that she would be creating weapons instead of cures. The facility stretched deep beneath the Nevada desert, its existence known only to a handful of military officials and government contractors. Sarah's laboratory occupied the 3rd sublevel, surrounded by reinforced concrete walls that could withstand a direct nuclear blast. The isolation was deliberate. What happened in Site 7 was never meant to see daylight. Project Nightfall had a simple objective: create enhanced soldiers capable of operating in complete darkness, with superhuman awareness and reaction times. The military brass believed that future conflicts would be won in the shadows, where traditional technology failed and human limitations became deadly weaknesses. They needed soldiers who could see in absolute darkness, move without sound, and strike with lethal precision. Sarah's role was to develop the neurological enhancements that would make this possible. Using a combination of experimental drugs, genetic therapy, and neural implants, she was tasked with rewiring the human brain to process sensory information in ways that nature never intended. The test subjects were volunteers from Special Forces units, men and women who had already proven their courage and dedication to their country. The first weeks of experimentation had been promising. Test subjects showed improved night vision and enhanced reflexes, but as the enhancements became more aggressive, disturbing side effects began to emerge. Subjects experienced severe headaches, hallucinations, and in some cases complete psychological breakdowns. 3 volunteers had to be permanently sedated after becoming violently unstable. Dr. Marcus Webb, the project director, pushed for more extreme modifications despite Sarah's growing concerns. Webb was a career military scientist with a reputation for achieving results regardless of the human cost. He had overseen biological weapons programs in 3 different countries and viewed the test subjects as expendable resources rather than human beings. Sarah found herself caught between her scientific ambitions and her medical oath to do no harm. Each day brought new horrors as the enhanced subjects began to exhibit behaviors that defied rational explanation. Some claimed they could hear conversations through concrete walls. Others insisted they could sense the presence of living beings through solid barriers. Most disturbing of all, several subjects developed an ability to move with absolute silence, becoming nearly invisible in low-light conditions. The breakthrough came during the 7th month of the program. Subject 23, a former Navy SEAL named Michael Torres, underwent the most advanced enhancement protocol yet attempted. The procedure involved direct injection of modified neurotransmitters into specific regions of his brain, followed by installation of microscopic sensors throughout his nervous system. For 48 hours after the procedure, Torres appeared to be responding perfectly. His night vision had improved to the point where he could read printed text in complete darkness. His reaction times were 3 times faster than baseline human measurements. Most remarkably, he seemed to have developed a form of echolocation that allowed him to navigate complex environments without any visual cues. Then everything went wrong. On the 3rd night after the enhancement, Torres escaped from his containment cell. The facility's security system, designed to prevent unauthorized entry rather than exit, proved inadequate against someone who could move through the ventilation system like a ghost. By the time the alarm sounded, Torres had already reached the upper levels. What followed was a nightmare that would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life. Torres systematically hunted down the security personnel with a precision that seemed inhuman. The facility's cameras captured glimpses of a figure moving through the corridors, but the footage was disturbing in its implications. Torres appeared to know exactly where each guard would be before they arrived. He moved through the darkness like he owned it, striking with lethal efficiency and vanishing before anyone could respond. The military response was swift and brutal. Within hours, the facility was surrounded by special forces units equipped with thermal imaging and night vision equipment. They found Torres in the main laboratory, standing motionless among the research equipment. When they ordered him to surrender, he simply smiled and spoke in a voice that no longer sounded entirely human. He told them that the darkness had shown him the truth, that the enhancements hadn't just improved his senses, they had connected him to something larger, something that existed in the spaces between light and shadow. The soldiers later reported that his eyes reflected light like an animal's, and that he seemed to know their positions even when they moved behind cover. The confrontation ended when Torres voluntarily returned to his cell. He claimed that his mission was not to escape, but to demonstrate what the project had truly created. Over the following days, similar incidents occurred with other enhanced subjects. They began displaying coordinated behaviors that suggested some form of shared consciousness or communication network that the researchers couldn't detect or understand. Dr. Webb's response was to accelerate the program rather than pause it for safety evaluations. He argued that they were on the verge of a breakthrough that would give their country an unprecedented military advantage. Sarah's protests were overruled, and she was ordered to begin preparations for the final phase of testing. The final phase involved 20 subjects simultaneously undergoing the most extreme enhancement protocol yet developed. Sarah spent sleepless nights reviewing the procedures, knowing that she was about to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. The enhanced subjects were no longer entirely human, and she was being asked to create 20 more beings like Torres. The night before the mass enhancement procedure, Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She began copying critical research data onto portable drives, intending to document what she believed would become a war crime. If the government was determined to create these enhanced beings, she would ensure that there was a record of what had been done and who was responsible. As she worked through the night, transferring files and research notes to encrypted storage devices, Sarah became aware that she was being watched. The sensation was subtle at first, like the feeling of being observed from across a crowded room. But as the hours passed, the presence became more obvious and more disturbing. She realized that the enhanced subjects were monitoring her activities through means she couldn't understand. They seemed to know that she was preparing to expose the project, and their response was unnervingly coordinated. When she left her laboratory, she found them standing silently in the corridors, not blocking her path, but making their presence known. They communicated through glances and subtle gestures, displaying a group intelligence that had never been documented in the research. The morning of the mass enhancement procedure arrived with an atmosphere of barely controlled tension. The 20 subjects selected for the final phase were the most psychologically stable volunteers remaining in the program. They had watched their fellow subjects transform into something beyond human understanding, yet they remained committed to completing their mission. Sarah entered the main laboratory to find the subjects already in position, connected to the enhancement apparatus that would flood their nervous systems with the modified compounds she had developed. Webb stood at the control console, his face showing the anticipation of a scientist about to make history. The military observers watched from behind reinforced glass, ready to witness the birth of a new form of warfare. As Sarah began the final system checks, Subject 23, Michael Torres, spoke from his position on the enhancement table. His voice carried clearly through the laboratory, though he spoke barely above a whisper. He told her that they understood what she was trying to do, and that they approved. The enhanced subjects had developed their own agenda, one that transcended the military's original objectives. The enhancement procedure began at exactly noon. Sarah monitored the subjects' vital signs as the experimental compounds flooded their systems, watching helplessly as 20 more human beings crossed the threshold into something else entirely. The transformation was more dramatic than anything they had previously witnessed. The subjects' brain activity spiked beyond measurable levels, their nervous systems adapting to the modifications at a rate that defied biological possibility. And then, without warning, the facility's power failed. Emergency lighting activated, casting the laboratory in a red glow that made everything look like a scene from hell. In the dim light, Sarah saw the enhanced subjects rising from their tables, moving with fluid coordination despite having been unconscious moments earlier. Doctor. Webb frantically worked at the backup controls, trying to restore full power and regain control of the situation. The military observers were shouting orders through their communication devices, calling for immediate containment protocols. But Sarah knew it was already too late. The enhanced subjects had become something that no prison could hold. No weapon could stop. In the chaos that followed, Sarah grabbed her research files and the portable drives containing the evidence she had gathered. The enhanced subjects ignored her as she moved through the laboratory. Their attention focused on something else entirely. They moved through the facility like a coordinated unit, their actions guided by an intelligence that operated beyond normal human perception. The last thing Sarah saw before the emergency blast doors sealed was the silhouette of Subject 23 standing in the corridor, perfectly still in the shifting shadows. He turned toward her and nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement that seemed to convey both respect and warning. In that moment, Sarah understood that she had created something that would reshape the world, whether she wanted to or not. The blast doors sealed with a sound like thunder, and Sarah found herself alone in the emergency shelter, with nothing but the evidence of what she had done. Above her, she could hear the sounds of a battle being fought between enhanced beings and conventional soldiers, a conflict that could only end one way. As she sat in the darkness, clutching the drives that contained the secrets of Project Nightfall, Sarah realized that her real survival had only just begun. The enhanced subjects might have become something beyond human understanding, but she remained entirely human, carrying knowledge that multiple governments would kill to obtain or destroy. The enemy had only seen her silhouette because in the world she was about to enter, staying in the shadows would be the only way to stay alive. The experiment was over, but her transformation from scientist to survivor was just beginning. Sarah's fingers traced the cold metal surface of the emergency shelter's wall as she listened to the sounds of destruction, echoing from above. The battle between the enhanced subjects and the facility's security forces had been raging for 3 hours, and the occasional tremor that shook the underground chamber told her that heavy weapons were now being deployed. The portable drives containing Project Nightfall's research data felt impossibly heavy in her jacket pocket. Sarah had spent the last hour reviewing the files on her laptop, using the shelter's backup power to compile a complete record of what had transpired. The evidence was damning. Government authorization documents, enhancement protocols, subject psychological evaluations, and video recordings of the transformations. When the blast doors finally opened 12 hours later, Sarah emerged into a facility that looked like a war zone. Scorch marks covered the walls where flame units had been deployed. Emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow, and the acrid smell of smoke and something else, something organic and disturbing, filled the air. Colonel James Morrison, the military commander responsible for Site 7's security, found Sarah in the ruins of her laboratory. Morrison was a career soldier who had overseen black operations in 6 different countries, but the expression on his weathered face suggested he had never encountered anything like what had happened at Site 7. Morrison explained that all 20 enhanced subjects had escaped the facility through methods that defied conventional understanding. They had moved through the ventilation systems, sealed blast doors, and multiple layers of security, as if the barriers didn't exist. More disturbing still, they had coordinated their escape with precision that suggested they were operating as a single entity rather than 20 individuals. The human cost had been devastating. 43 security personnel, 12 researchers, and 6 military observers had been killed during the subjects' escape. The deaths weren't random violence. They were surgical eliminations of specific targets who posed threats to the subjects' objectives. Dr. Webb had been found in his office with his neck snapped, his personal files missing, and his computer's hard drive completely destroyed. Sarah learned that she was the only surviving member of the core research team. The enhanced subjects had systematically eliminated everyone who understood the technical aspects of their creation, leaving her as the sole repository of knowledge about Project Nightfall. Morrison made it clear that this made her simultaneously invaluable and extremely dangerous to national security. The immediate aftermath of the Site 7 incident became a study in government damage control. The facility was officially listed as experiencing a contained industrial accident that resulted in multiple casualties. The families of the deceased were told their loved ones had died in service to classified national security operations, with generous compensation packages that included strict non-disclosure agreements. Sarah was debriefed by intelligence analysts for 72 consecutive hours. They wanted every detail about the enhancement procedures, the subject's capabilities, and any insight she might have into their current whereabouts and objectives. Sarah provided technical information freely, but she carefully avoided mentioning the portable drives hidden in her quarters or her growing suspicions about the subject's true nature. During the debriefing sessions, disturbing reports began filtering in from around the world. Military installations in 3 countries had experienced security breaches involving individuals who seemed to possess superhuman abilities. Surveillance footage showed figures moving through high-security facilities with the same fluid coordination Sarah had witnessed during the Site-7 escape. The enhanced subjects weren't hiding. They were recruiting. Intelligence analysts presented evidence that the escaped subjects were seeking out individuals with specific psychological and physiological profiles. Former Special Forces operators, professional athletes, individuals with documented exceptional sensory capabilities, and most concerningly, scientists with expertise in neurology and genetic modification. Sarah realized that the enhanced subjects were building an organization, creating a network of individuals who could undergo the enhancement process and join their ranks. They had retained enough of their human intelligence to understand that 20 enhanced beings, no matter how capable, couldn't achieve their objectives alone. They needed to grow their numbers systematically and strategically. 3 weeks after the Site-7 incident, Sarah was assigned to a new classified program, Operation Shadow Hunt. Her role was to serve as a technical consultant to military units tasked with tracking and containing the enhanced subjects. The government's official position was that the subjects were dangerous individuals who had been psychologically damaged by experimental procedures and needed to be captured for medical treatment. Sarah knew this was a lie. The enhanced subjects weren't damaged. They had evolved into something beyond human limitations, and they were intelligent enough to understand the implications of their transformation. They weren't random killers or mentally unstable individuals. They were apex predators with human intelligence and superhuman capabilities, and they had their own agenda. The first Shadow Hunt operation took place in Eastern Europe, where intelligence suggested that 3 enhanced subjects were operating from a former Soviet research facility. Sarah accompanied a joint military task force equipped with the most advanced detection equipment available, including thermal imaging systems, motion sensors, and experimental sound mapping technology. The facility appeared abandoned when the task force arrived. Satellite surveillance had detected no activity for weeks, and infrared scans showed no heat signatures indicating human presence. The military commanders were confident they were dealing with outdated intelligence, but Sarah insisted on conducting a thorough search. The task force entered the facility in full combat formation, with Sarah positioned in the center of the group under heavy protection. The building's interior was a maze of abandoned laboratories and offices, filled with equipment that had been left to rust for decades. Everything appeared normal until they reached the facility's central research area. There, they found evidence that someone had been using the abandoned equipment. Computer systems that should have been inoperative were showing signs of recent use. Laboratory equipment had been modified in ways that suggested intimate knowledge of advanced enhancement procedures. Most disturbing of all, they discovered evidence that enhancement procedures had been performed on multiple subjects. The facility's lights went out simultaneously, plunging the task force into absolute darkness. Their night vision equipment immediately activated, but what they saw through their artificial eyes was more terrifying than the darkness itself. The enhanced subjects moved through the facility like ghosts, appearing and disappearing in ways that defied the task force's training and equipment. They seemed to understand exactly how the military's night vision technology worked and had developed tactics specifically designed to exploit its limitations. They appeared as brief shadows at the edge of vision, striking with lethal precision before vanishing back into the darkness. Sarah found herself separated from the main task force during the chaos. She had been carrying a modified tablet computer loaded with Site-7's research data, hoping to identify weaknesses in the enhanced subject's abilities. As she crouched in an abandoned office, using the tablet's dim light to navigate through technical specifications, she became aware that she was no longer alone. Subject 23, Michael Torres, emerged from the shadows with the fluid motion she remembered from Site-7, but his appearance had changed dramatically since their last encounter. His eyes reflected light like an animal's, and his movements suggested a level of physical coordination that seemed to defy human limitations. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that hadn't been present during his initial enhancement. Torres explained that the enhanced subjects had been monitoring Sarah's activities since the Site-7 incident. They knew about Operation Shadow Hunt, the task force's equipment and tactics, and most importantly, they knew about the portable drives containing Project Nightfall's research data. He told her that they didn't consider her an enemy. They considered her the architect of their revolution. The conversation that followed would haunt Sarah for months afterward. Torres described the enhanced subject's perception of reality in terms that challenged everything she understood about consciousness and human potential. They experienced the world as a network of interconnected sensory data that allowed them to perceive patterns and connections invisible to unenhanced humans. They could sense electrical fields generated by living beings, detect chemical signatures that revealed emotional states, and process acoustic information in ways that effectively gave them three-dimensional awareness of their environment. Most remarkably, they seemed to have developed a form of collective consciousness that allowed them to share sensory data and coordinate their actions across vast distances. Torres told Sarah that the enhancement process hadn't just modified their individual capabilities, it had connected them to something larger. He described it as touching the edge of a form of existence that transcended individual consciousness, where the boundaries between self and environment became fluid and permeable. The enhanced subjects understood that their transformation was irreversible. They could never return to ordinary human existence, and they knew that governments around the world would never stop trying to contain or eliminate them. Their only option was to continue evolving, to build a community of enhanced beings who could survive in a world that would inevitably see them as threats. Torres offered Sarah a choice that would define the rest of her life. She could undergo the enhancement process and join them, using her scientific knowledge to help guide their evolution and protect their community. Alternative, she could continue working with the military forces hunting them, but they would ensure that she survived regardless of the outcome. The enhanced subjects had decided that Sarah's scientific expertise was too valuable to lose. Whether she joined them voluntarily or remained as an unwilling ally, they would protect her from the government forces that would eventually see her as a liability rather than an asset. Sarah's response surprised even herself. She told Torres that she needed time to consider his offer, but that she wouldn't betray their location to the task force. She had created them, and she felt responsible for what they had become. But she also couldn't abandon her humanity for the promise of transcendent evolution. Torres accepted her decision with what might have been respect. He told her that they would continue their recruitment and enhancement activities whether she joined them or not. The world was about to change in ways that would make the current geopolitical landscape obsolete. Enhanced beings would eventually replace baseline humans as the dominant species on Earth, and the only question was whether that transition would be guided by wisdom or driven by conflict. The task force found Sarah an hour later, sitting alone in the abandoned office with her tablet computer displaying Project Nightfall's technical specifications. She reported that she had encountered no enhanced subjects and had found no evidence of their current whereabouts. The official mission report listed the operation as unsuccessful, with no actionable intelligence gathered, but Sarah knew that everything had changed during her conversation with Torres. The enhanced subjects weren't just escaping or hiding, they were building something that would reshape human civilization. And whether she wanted to admit it or not, she was already a part of their plans. Portable drives containing Project Nightfall's research data remained hidden in her quarters, but they no longer felt like evidence of past crimes. They had become the blueprint for humanity's future, and Sarah was the only person who fully understood their implications. As the task force extracted from the facility, Sarah watched the abandoned building disappear into the distance. Somewhere in those ruins, enhanced beings were continuing their evolution, guided by scientific principles she had helped develop. The enemy might only see her silhouette, but she could see the shadow of what humanity was becoming, and she wasn't sure whether that future terrified her or filled her with anticipation. 6 months after the Eastern European incident, Sarah Chan had become the most closely monitored scientist in the world. Her every movement was tracked by government surveillance systems, her communications were intercepted and analyzed, and her living quarters were equipped with sensors that could detect the slightest deviation from normal behavior patterns. Operation Shadowhunt had expanded into a global initiative involving intelligence agencies from 12 different countries. The enhanced subjects had been reclassified from escape test subjects to existential threats to human civilization. Reports of their activities were flooding in from every continent, painting a picture of an organization that was growing in size, sophistication, and ambition. Sarah's role in the operation had evolved from technical consultant to something resembling a prisoner with privileges. She was housed in a secure facility outside Washington, D.C., where she worked with teams of military strategists, intelligence analysts, and behavioral psychologists to develop countermeasures against the enhanced beings she had created. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same government that had authorized Project Nightfall was now spending millions of dollars trying to undo its consequences. But Sarah knew that conventional military thinking was fundamentally inadequate for dealing with beings who operated according to rules that transcended human limitations. The enhanced subjects had demonstrated capabilities that challenged basic assumptions about warfare, surveillance, and security. They could infiltrate facilities that should have been impregnable, eliminate targets that should have been untouchable, and coordinate operations across distances that should have made communication impossible. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to be learning and adapting at an accelerated rate. Each encounter with government forces provided them with new information about human tactics and technology. They incorporated these insights into their operations with a speed and efficiency that suggested their collective intelligence was operating at levels far beyond individual human cognition. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the psychiatrist assigned to evaluate Sarah's psychological state, had become something approaching a friend during the long months of isolation. Vasquez was one of the few people cleared to discuss the technical aspects of Project Nightfall, and her insights into the psychological implications of the enhancement process had proven invaluable. During one of their regular sessions, Vasquez presented Sarah with intelligence reports that changed everything. The enhanced subjects weren't just recruiting new members randomly. They were specifically targeting individuals with genetic markers that suggested compatibility with the enhancement process. They had somehow gained access to medical databases and genetic research facilities, allowing them to identify potential candidates with unprecedented precision. More concerning still, they were beginning to enhance individuals without their consent. Intelligence agencies had documented cases where people with suitable genetic profiles had disappeared from their normal lives, only to resurface weeks later displaying the characteristic abilities of enhanced beings. The process was becoming systematic and industrial in scale. Sarah realized that her worst fears about Project Nightfall were being realized. The enhanced subjects weren't just trying to survive, they were actively working to replace baseline humanity with enhanced beings. They had retained enough human intelligence to understand that their long-term survival required the extinction of their creators. The revelation came during a conversation with Colonel Morrison, who had been promoted to oversee all shadow hunt operations following the Eastern European incident. Morrison showed Sarah classified satellite footage from a facility in Central Asia, where enhanced subjects had established what appeared to be a permanent base of operations. The facility was a former Soviet biological research station that the enhanced subjects had modified extensively. Thermal imaging showed evidence of large-scale construction projects, power generation systems, and what appeared to be medical facilities equipped for performing enhancement procedures. Most remarkably, the facility's population had grown from the original 20 escapees to more than 200 individuals. Morrison explained that conventional military assault on the facility was impossible. The enhanced beings had demonstrated the ability to detect approaching forces from distances that made surprise attacks impractical. They had also shown that they could coordinate defensive strategies that neutralized technological advantages through superior tactical awareness. The government's solution was as desperate as it was morally questionable. Sarah would be sent to the facility under the pretense of defecting from Operation Shadowhunt. She would carry with her modified versions of the enhancement compounds that would appear to provide the normal capabilities, but would actually include delayed action elements designed to neutralize the enhanced being's abilities. Sarah understood that she was being asked to commit genocide against beings she had helped create. The plan required her to betray the trust that Subject 23 had shown during their Eastern European encounter, potentially destroying hundreds of enhanced individuals who had never chosen their transformation. The internal conflict that followed nearly drove Sarah to a complete psychological breakdown. She had spent months analyzing the technical aspects of the enhanced being's abilities, but she had avoided confronting the moral implications of her role in their creation. Now she was being asked to become their executioner. Dr. Vasquez helped Sarah work through the ethical complexities of her situation during intensive counseling sessions that continued for weeks. The psychiatrist pointed out that the enhanced beings had demonstrated a willingness to eliminate baseline humans who opposed their objectives. They had shown no remorse for the deaths at Site 7, and their systematic recruitment activities suggested they viewed ordinary humanity as an obstacle to be overcome. But Sarah also understood that the enhanced beings' actions were driven by survival instincts rather than malicious intent. They had been created as weapons and then abandoned when their creators lost control. Their transformation had left them incapable of returning to ordinary human society, making conflict with baseline humanity inevitable. The decision that would define Sarah's legacy came during a secure video conference with the highest levels of government leadership. Military advisors, intelligence officials, and senior policymakers outlined the global threat assessment that justified the planned operation against the enhanced beings facility. Their analysis painted a picture of a future where enhanced beings systematically replaced baseline humans through forced conversion and selective elimination. Population models suggested that without intervention, enhanced beings could become the dominant species on Earth within 50 years. The technological and organizational advantages they had demonstrated made conventional resistance increasingly futile. Sarah was presented with a choice that echoed the offer Subject 23 had made months earlier in the abandoned Soviet facility. She could cooperate with the government's plan to eliminate the enhanced beings, or she could be classified as a security threat and eliminated along with them. There was no neutral position in a conflict that would determine the future of human evolution. Her response surprised everyone in the conference room. Sarah agreed to undertake the mission, but she demanded complete access to Project Nightfall's original research data and the authority to modify the neutralization compounds according to her own specifications. She told the government officials that if they wanted her to destroy what she had created, she would do it properly. What Sarah didn't reveal was that she had no intention of committing genocide. Instead, she planned to use her access to the facility to gather intelligence about the enhanced being's true objectives and capabilities. The portable drives containing Project Nightfall's data had given her insights into potential modifications of the enhancement process that could address some of the psychological instabilities she had observed. The journey to the Central Asian facility took 3 weeks of careful preparation and covert travel. Sarah carried with her modified enhancement compounds that appeared identical to the original formulations, but contained tracking elements that would allow government forces to monitor the enhanced being's activities. She also carried a personal message for Subject 23 that she hoped would prevent immediate violence when she revealed her true intentions. The enhanced beings detected her approach while she was still 50 kilometers from their facility. Sarah found herself surrounded by individuals whose abilities had continued to develop during the months since Site 7. They moved with fluid coordination that suggested their collective consciousness had become more sophisticated, and their sensory capabilities appeared to have expanded beyond anything she had previously documented. Subject 23 had physically changed even more dramatically since their Eastern European encounter. His appearance had become almost ethereal, with features that seemed to shift subtly in response to environmental conditions. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated in ways that affected Sarah's emotional state directly. The facility they had created was unlike anything Sarah had imagined. The enhanced beings had transformed the abandoned Soviet research station into something that resembled a fusion of advanced laboratory and mystical sanctuary. The architecture incorporated design elements that took advantage of their expanded sensory capabilities, creating spaces that were perfectly optimized for enhanced perception. Sarah was taken to a central chamber, where the facility's enhanced population had gathered to witness her arrival. 200 beings who had once been entirely human now represented something that transcended the boundaries of individual consciousness. They communicated through subtle gestures, changes in posture, and acoustic frequencies that created a complex information network. Subject 23 explained that they had known about Operation Shadowhunt's plans from the beginning. The enhanced beings' collective intelligence had allowed them to monitor government communications and predict official responses to their activities. They had allowed Sarah to reach their facility because they wanted to offer her a final opportunity to join their evolution. The conversation that followed lasted for days. Sarah learned that the enhanced beings had developed technologies and capabilities that went far beyond the original Project Nightfall specifications. They had discovered methods for modifying their own enhancements, creating specialized abilities that allowed them to interact with electromagnetic fields, process quantum-level information, and perceive temporal patterns that baseline humans couldn't detect. Most remarkably, they had begun to understand the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. The enhancement process had connected them to what they described as the underlying information structure of reality, allowing them to perceive and interact with patterns that existed beyond the physical universe. Sarah realized that the enhanced beings weren't planning to replace baseline humanity through force or conversion. They were preparing for something far more profound. A transformation of human consciousness that would fundamentally alter the nature of existence on Earth. They saw themselves as the first step in an evolutionary process that would eventually encompass all intelligent life. The portable drives containing Project Nightfall's research data had become obsolete. The enhanced beings had transcended the original enhancement protocols and developed modifications that addressed the psychological instability Sarah had observed. They offered to share these improvements with her, but only if she underwent the enhancement process herself. Sarah's final decision came as she stood in the facility's central chamber, surrounded by beings who had once been human but had become something greater. The tracking elements in her enhancement compounds were broadcasting her location to Operation Shadowhunt's assault teams, who would arrive within hours, expecting to find enhanced beings weakened by her sabotage. Instead of activating the neutralization protocol she had been sent to deploy, Sarah chose to undergo the enhancement process herself. She had spent months analyzing the technical specifications of human consciousness modification, but she had never truly understood what it meant to transcend the limitations of baseline human existence. The transformation was unlike anything she had experienced or imagined. Her consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of her individual identity, connecting her to the collective awareness that linked all enhanced beings. She could perceive electromagnetic fields, process multiple streams of sensory information simultaneously, and access forms of knowledge that existed beyond rational understanding. When Operation Shadowhunt's assault teams arrived at the facility, they found it empty except for a single message written on the wall of the central chamber. The message, in Sarah's handwriting, explained that the enhanced beings had evolved beyond the need for physical facilities or fixed locations. They had become something that existed in the spaces between conventional reality, accessible only to those who had undergone the same transformation. The government's official report listed Dr. Villain. Sarah Chen is killed in action during the failed assault on the Enhanced Beings facility. Her body was never recovered, and the portable drives containing Project Nightfall's research data were never found. Operation Shadowhunt was classified at the higher security levels and officially terminated due to lack of actionable intelligence. But in the shadows between light and darkness, Enhanced Beings continued their work. They moved through the world as silhouettes at the edge of perception, guiding humanity toward an evolutionary transformation that would redefine the nature of consciousness itself. Sarah had become the architect of humanity's future. But that future belonged to beings who existed beyond the limitations that had once defined human potential. The enemy could only see their silhouettes because they had evolved beyond the need to be seen. And in the darkness they inhabited, new forms of existence were taking shape that would eventually encompass all life on Earth. The experiment had ended, but the evolution it had triggered would continue until every human being had the opportunity to transcend their limitations and join the collective consciousness that Sarah had helped create. The lone survivor of Project Nightfall had become the mother of a new form of life that would inherit the Earth not through conquest, but through the irresistible appeal of unlimited potential. In the end, they were all shadows of what humanity could become. The enemy only saw her silhouette, the lone survivor of the experiment.